Viewers, Assalamu alaikum. I'm your host Faisal and you are watching Foresight. Viewers, the situation in Middle East is extremely complex and volatile. Recent US-backed 60-day ceasefire between illegitimate state of Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah raised more questions than answers as the illegitimate Israeli forces continue bombardment on Lebanon, as well as the Israeli de facto Prime Minister Netanyahu once again said that it was not the end of war. The situation in Gaza remained dire, with Palestinians feeling abandoned and fearful about the Israeli genocidal war. As the brutal bombardment continues at Gaza Strip, the ground invasion is there, especially in the northern Gaza, while more Palestinians are dying, as more than 44,000 Palestinians already killed by the occupation forces, and more than 100,000 are already injured. More are dying because of the acute famine, malnutrition and hunger. Syrian situation dramatically changed and it is getting worse. On the other hand, Iran is also claiming that it is preparing for a possible retaliation or a response against Israel. We are also going to discuss the talks between the two important factions of Palestinians. One is Hamas and other is Fatah in Cairo, Egypt, which shown a little movement. Then also the prospects of Israel and Hamas ceasefire, which is a grim possibility, as recently United States once again vetoed a UN Security Council draft resolution on unconditional ceasefire and immediate urgent ceasefire in Gaza. This is the fourth time that United States has used its veto power in United Nations Security Council. On the other hand, France and Saudi Arabia are preparing for a co-hosting of the Palestinian Statehood Conference next year in June 2025. The International Criminal Court also issued an international arrest warrant of the de facto Israeli leadership. But whole of the world is still staring, waiting for the peace and stability in Gaza, in West Bank and across Middle East. We'll discuss this whole dire situation, what is happening, and the latest situation and the updates which are happening there in the Middle East. We have in our studios Mr. Fraz Naqvi. He is the head of Iran program at the Institute of Regional Studies, IRS. Most welcome to you, Fraz. Thank you very much for your presence. And along with him, Mr. Hamza Amir Khalil. He is the international relations expert. Most welcome to you, Hamza. Thank you very much. And online joining us, Dr. Saira Nawaz Abbasi. She is the expert on Mid-Eastern affairs and also senior assistant professor at the Barrier University. Most welcome to you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your presence online. First question to you, Hamza, that after November 27, 2024, the US-backed 60-day ceasefire, apparently the end of 14 months of the war in Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah both accusing each other once again of violations, while Israel continues breaching the ceasefire agreement because they are retaliating and also bombarding the Lebanon's south particularly. Netanyahu says the ceasefire is not the end of war. Where the situation is actually heading?
Well, as you have said, that despite the ceasefire, the clashes are already taking place again and again between the Hezbollah forces and the Israeli forces. Israel has conducted multiple airstrikes in various areas of Lebanon, and Hezbollah has launched retaliatory strikes targeting Sheba farms and especially the Israeli forces located on the southern border. The situation as of now is precarious, but I think if this ceasefire does not break down for at least 60 days, there is going to be a strategic pause, temporary strategic pause. Because Hezbollah right now is under pressure from the Syrian front, because just a few weeks back, the Syrian rebels have launched an offensive against the Assad's regime. And Bashar al-Assad, as we know, is an ally of Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah.
Yes.
So right now, as of now, the policy which Israel is utilizing is to destabilize the region. Because in the destabilization of the region, they feel that they are going to be secure. So right now, Iran and Hezbollah are trying to secure the Syrian front and their assets in this area, and they have left it on the Lebanese army to deal and sort out negotiations with Israeli forces.
So we will discuss the Syrian situation as well, but Fraz, Hezbollah had insisted earlier that it would not agree to the ceasefire, any possible ceasefire, until the war in Gaza ends. But it dropped that condition and accepted the ceasefire. Do you not think that it had actually left the Palestinians feeling abandoned and fearful that the Israeli genocidal war actually will focus squarely in the enclave? It shows Gaza is like an orphan with no support and no mercy from the unjust world.
Thank you so much, Faisal, for inviting me to your show. Well, I do not think in this manner, because the ceasefire brokered by France and US between Hezbollah and Israel is basically the continuation of the already brokered ceasefire between Hamas and Israel through Qatar and Egypt. So we see that first Israel agreed to have a ceasefire with Hamas for at least 30 days, and then that was a conditional ceasefire, and then another round of conditional ceasefire with Hezbollah. So with this, what we see that why Israel initiated the ceasefire despite disagreeing previously, we saw that this October 2024 became the most worst month for Israeli forces since December last year, because according to some estimates, there are approximately over 150 Israeli soldiers that were killed in southern Lebanon, and over 12,000 were injured, and the tally goes up to 1,000 per month. And despite having so much technological advancement, Israel could not invade southern Lebanon as it was envisaged.
Yes.
According to some reports, Israel could only manage to hold 2 kilometers of southern Lebanese territory and could not go further. So that is why, because of the internal pressure and because of the heightened casualties on the Israeli side, Israel basically initiated this ceasefire through France and the US. So in this sense, we could not say that the situation of Palestine has been abandoned, because both Hezbollah and Hamas mutually agreed to have some sort of ceasefire to regroup themselves and to
mutually agreed to have
themselves.
ceasefire. So when we are talking about the mutual coordination between Hamas and Al-Fateh, there were talks in Cairo, Egypt, on post-war Gaza administration or something like that, have actually ended with some sort of reported momentum among them. Secondly, any prospects and hope that there would be any sort of a possible deal between Israel and Hamas as well? At the same lines what the Hezbollah and Israel conflict ended for 60 days.
Well, firstly, I'm coming to your second part. Firstly, I do not think that there is going to be any ceasefire deal between Israel and Palestinians as of now, especially because of Israel's rigid stance and their following of the general's plan. As far as the Al-Fateh and Hamas is concerned, I don't think Israel is going to allow them to rule over Gaza as well, because they have categorically declared that they would not allow either party to rule over Gaza, which you are talking about, that they were holding negotiations to jointly administer Palestinian and Israeli lands. Secondly, the most important aspect of maintaining ceasefire between Palestinians and Israel would depend on whether Israel forces will withdraw from Israel or not. Because if they are not going to withdraw, I don't see any negotiation deal becoming successful, because these Palestinian factions are not going to accept Israeli control over Israel. Thirdly, there is
on Gaza.
On Gaza. Then thirdly, we have Donald Trump's factor. Unless he takes the office, and there are still 40 days left, I don't think he's going to allow or appreciate Netanyahu doing ceasefire with Hamas and giving credit to Democrats and Joe Biden for that. So we will have to wait for Donald Trump to take the office, assume the office, and then we can predict that if the ceasefire is going to happen or not, and under what circumstances.
Definitely, you are absolutely right. But till then, there would be. It was too much late, because it's the matter of lives there in Gaza, no doubt about that.
But
the situation is like that.
well, global politics.
You are absolutely right on that. Fraz, What about media reports that some armed Palestinian groups supported by Israeli occupation forces have been attacking the aid convoys, looting and preventing them from reaching their destination points? Whether this United Nations Refugee Agency for the Palestinians aid suspension through Karim Abu Shalom crossing between the Gaza and Israel due to the worsening situation, this whole security situation, or is this all linked with each other, or it's the Zionist state actually another nefarious design to malign Palestinians?
Well, Faisal, it is a very tragic question, to be very honest, because those people that attacked the convoy, they did not attack. Basically, they were not armed. They were not any armed militias affiliated with any Palestinian group, whether it Hamas, Palestine Islamic Jihad, or any other third party groups. They were basically mere civilians who were so dire of food and who were so dire of aid that they could not resist. And it is the human nature when Israel is starving the people of Gaza for more than a year now. It has been going on, and Israel has completely cut off.
Because unfortunately, most of the Western media is propagating that these are the armed groups supported by some of the Israeli factions, or might be the settlers.
Well, we need to understand, Faisal, that this is not only the war of technology or war of weapons. This is also the war of narrative as well.
Yes,
so the Palestinian people, they are those starved people that have been put into this situation by the Israeli occupational forces, and that is why when any aid convoy would pass through their territories, definitely they would be so desperate to get their hands to the to that aid convoy. So we could not say that was the attack, but that was the desperation and the frustration on the behalf of Palestinian civilians, not the armed any groups as well.
Definitely, you are absolutely right. Your point well taken, Dr. Saira. Do you not think that there is any essence left in the statements regarding the peace in Palestine, especially in Gaza, as after the US vetoed the fourth unconditional ceasefire resolution, the draft resolution in the United Nations Security Council, despite Amnesty International recent report of Israeli genocide in Gaza? The White House also said that US Middle East envoy Brett McGurk visited Saudi Arabia and discussed using a potential Lebanon ceasefire as a catalyst for a deal to end hostilities in Gaza. What do you think about this?
Well, these statements about peace in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, holds a very low credibility due to the contradiction between the actions and rhetoric of the United States of America, and the veto that has been made by the USA. It further undermines the practical pursuit of peace, which shows that they prioritize their strategic alliances over humanitarian concerns. And simultaneously, the diplomatic engagement of US in the Middle East through its envoy in Saudi Arabia to discuss leveraging a Lebanon ceasefire as a potential model for Gaza. It further suggests that it is an attempt to maintain just an appearance of commitment to peace, but it lacks the tangible outcomes. So these are, for me, it's quite conflicting approaches that identify the broader challenges of achieving a genuine and sustainable resolution of the conflict. Well, diplomatic efforts do indicate a desire for de-escalation, but the absence of concrete support for the ceasefire in the UNSC erodes the essence of peace-oriented rhetoric of the United States of America. So without any substantial actions to address the immediate humanitarian crisis and establish mechanisms for accountability, I believe such statements would be perceived as hollow and politically motivated rather than bringing some real efforts to secure peace.
So do you think that because the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan tells the US media that White House is working on the truce deal in Gaza, but not there yet, and that negotiation taking place behind the scenes over the war in Gaza. Gulf Cooperation Council, France and Saudi Arabia called for an immediate ceasefire once again, where these negotiations are happening. But unfortunately, after Qatar suspended its role in peace talks, do you think that there is enough hope to have a peace in Gaza and cumulatively in Palestine?
Ideally, involving the key actors and key stakeholders into the peace process is, of course, should bring a fruitful implications. However, as you mentioned that the Qatar has suspended its role, and we know that historically Qatar has been playing a very significant role as a mediator in Gaza-related negotiations. So I think it will further complicate these efforts because Qatar's withdrawal shows that there is a difficulty finding a consensus among the parties amid all these intensified hostilities and divergence of interest of the parties involved. While GCC, France and Saudi Arabia, they have advocated for an immediate ceasefire, but achieving peace remains uncertain because of the obstacles. And one of those obstacles are the lack of alignment between the calls for the peace and truce and actions on the ground. Because military operations of the Israelis continues, and USA has always been hesitant to push for a ceasefire. They are providing with the military aid and assistance and giving them the diplomatic cover. So therefore, it gives me a very glimmer hope for the immediate prospects that it would bring. However, if there is sustained international pressure, global condemnation, these two things I would say would bring a window of opportunity towards de-escalation. Because for true peace, it would require a long-term framework that addresses the core issues, including the issue of security, sovereignty, and the rights of the Palestinian people. And these goals are currently under current circumstances and environment doesn't look like that they are achievable.
Your point well taken, Dr. Saira. Fraz, what about the planned France-Saudi Arabia joint conference or the co-hosting of the conference on Palestinian statehood in June next year? As just recently, United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution with 157 votes in favor, also urges Israel to withdraw from the Palestinian territories. Would it make any difference to really establish an independent Palestinian state, whether after Ireland, Spain and Norway? Other European states would also recognize the Palestine as an independent state and practically implement it, because that is very important to implement it, because we have lots of resolutions there, but no implementation.
Well, it is a positive step, and we must welcome it, because since the Gaza war has started, it has always been dominated by either Israel or Iran as the defensive force and or the counter force against Israel, or to some extent Turkey as well. But we see very minimalist role of Arab states or Arab region as a whole, Arab world as a whole, in defending or voicing the support for Gaza. So this step by the Saudi authorities, it is quite welcoming.
Because Saudi Arabia has earlier OIC Arab conference was held in Riyadh, and also there was recent GCC conference in Kuwait as well. So Saudi Arabia is trying hard to have something for the Palestinians. So do you think that this co-hosting of particularly France with Saudi Arabia, that has some meaning?
Yes, it is significant for two reasons. The first reason is that it would depict the unified force of Arab world, in which all the Arab states, whether Gulf states or non-Gulf states, which speak Arab or belong to Arab region, would jointly support and voice for the Palestinian statehood. And the second important thing is that in this conference, there is the representation from the Western world, which we previously thought is supporting the Israeli state. But right now there are many, as you mentioned, many European European states who are in favor of Palestinian statehood. So, as Dr. Abbasi said, that the continued international pressure and the continued condemnation of Israel would pave the way for the Palestinian statehood. Regarding the second part of your question, that whether it would be practically possible to implement, this is the question, I think, which is very hard to tell, which is very hard to answer, because practically on ground there are Israeli forces, and I don't think that Israel would ever want to have the Palestinian statehood, because Israel has already, different statements from the Israeli officials have already testified that they want only one state, and that is the illegitimate state of Israel.
Well described. Hamza, earlier you were talking about the US President-elect Donald Trump. He announces the Lebanese-American businessman Massad Bulus as the senior advisor on Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. He met with the Arab Americans and the Muslim leaders during the election campaign of Mr. Donald Trump. Do you think Massad would make any difference to the Middle Eastern crisis?
Well, first of all, I see it as a nepotistic appointment, sadly, because he is Tiffany's father-in-law, who is the youngest daughter of Donald Trump. Secondly, we also know that Donald Trump is an egoistic personality. He does not really like taking advices from anyone, especially when it comes to Middle Eastern issues. And we have a case study of John Bolton. Yeah. He was ousted from the office. But in any way, if Bulus is able to influence and persuade Donald Trump on Middle Eastern matters, I believe he will inject a new personality into the inner circle of Donald Trump, which is dominated by Jewish lobby. Because Bulus, he represents a small, powerful social and economic circle which are basically working in Middle East, the Eastern Christians. And they have a hold on Middle Eastern politics as well. They are allied with Bashar al-Assad, they are allied with Lebanese politicians. They have close relations with Hezbollah as well.
And he is among the evangelical circles, so yes. He has the influence on, when we are talking about AIPAC and all that, so it means that 70-80% of the pro-Israeli voters supported Trump. So he is the one who was actually gaining the Arab and the Muslim voters.
But there is one problem in that. But despite having him on board, I think Trump administration will still have to face a lot of challenges when it comes to the ongoing violence in Raza, when it comes to so-called two-state solution, when it comes to the ongoing Israel-Lebanese tension, when it comes to the recent Syrian offensive, a resurgence of insurgency in Syria and civil war, and finally when it comes to dealing with the Iran nuclear program.
Definitely, you are absolutely right on that front as well. Dr. Saira, whether international community will ever investigate the Israeli brutal plan of the Palestinian genocide, ethnic cleansing and mass killings, especially recently through international prohibited weaponry, as several reports indicates that in northern Gaza, bodies were evaporated due to the use of such extremely dangerous weapons.
This depends on several legal, political, and geopolitical factors. For example, legally, the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the states who are party to the Rome Statute, as well as the territories recognized by ICC, such as Palestine. However, Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute, which complicates the jurisdiction. Unless referred by the United Nations Security Council, a process that could be again vetoed by the permanent member like the United States of America. There is no, a very optimistic view prevails, according to me at least. Similarly, the international bodies like United Nations Human Rights Council or ad hoc commissions and initiatives, inquiries, for example, UN has launched commissions in the past also, such as Goldstone report after Operation Cast Lead in 2008 and 2009. But these investigations often face criticism due to the lack of an enforcement mechanism, limited accountability, and politicization. From the perspective of the political and geopolitical challenges to hold Israel accountable, we have seen over the period of time that the political shielding has always given to the Israel by the US. So that limits the international community's ability to hold Israel accountable. The use of internationally prohibited weaponry, if proven, constitute a grave breach of international humanitarian law, and like you mentioned, the reports of evaporated bodies in the northern Gaza, if verified, this suggested a deployment of thermobaric and other experimental weapons. So investigation would require forensic evidence and expert analysis under the supervision of impartial bodies. But for all these things, gaining access to the conflict zone is very, very essential to get the evidence, to collect the evidence. But this conflict zone, like Gaza, it is nearly impossible due to the cycle of conflict, due to the ongoing hostilities, and of course, a lot of restrictions made by Israel. So I would urge again that the role of the civil society, the NGOs, the independent investigative bodies, they can play a crucial role in documenting the evidence and advocating for justice and holding Israel accountable. So,
Dr.
public
Saira,
pressure.
Dr. Saira, you were mentioning about the United Nations Human Rights Council and all the civil society bodies. Recently, more than 50 countries sent a letter to the United Nations demanding an end to armed deliveries to Israel. Would it be possible in presence of the US pressure and the Western pressure on the United Nations, as the United States is the one which has just vetoed a fourth UN security draft resolution that demanded an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza, ensure uninterrupted aid supply to the stranded population, save them from acute famine? There were at least 14 votes out of 15, but failed because of the United States' negative vote.
Well, I don't have any optimistic point of view regarding that could happen in the presence of US, that again armed deliveries to the Israel could be halted, because we have seen that United States had been supported to Israel both militarily, diplomatically, and it further complicates the efforts to curtail the arms deliveries. US provides billions of dollars in military aid to Israel annually. And because why? Because they view them as a cornerstone of their strategic partnership in the Middle East. So they always veto in the United Nations Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire. So US demonstrated its willingness to shield Israel from international scrutiny or constraints, or including arm embargoes. Even with broad international support, like you have mentioned that 50 countries calling for an arms embargo, that is also very, very challenging even under the UN framework. For example, UNSC Council is the body that can impose binding arms embargoes. However, any resolution until now would likely to be vetoed by the US. And on the other hand, if this matter could be taken into the UNGA General Assembly, that can adopt resolution under the Uniting for Peace mechanism, as it has done in the past also. But there are no non-binding things, and that depends upon the member states for enforcement. Then there are other, also many countries, particularly in the global south, they are very vocal about the ongoing war in the Gaza, including, and they they are against that there should be halt in the supplies of the arms. But there are bilateral agreements of the countries which are often legally binding contracts between the governments and defense industries. And many countries view Israel as a critical ally in countering regional threats like Iran and maintaining geopolitical stability in the Middle East. So it has a very, again, not an effective thing to do in halting the arm embargo. Again, that could be happen only if there is a pressure by the at the grassroots level by the civil society.
Definitely, you're absolutely right. If there would be a consistent international pressure on Israel or to the countries who are actually the weapon providers to Israel, so that is going to be a real catalyst of change. So, Faraz, do you not think that the latest draft resolution was somewhat was the hope for the Palestinians' survival through the ceasefire and inevitable aid supplies, especially in the northern Gaza. And its rejection meant that US don't want peace in Middle East, deliberately failing the United Nations and its Security Council particularly, and against the vast majority of the UN member states particularly, and responsible for the atrocities, whatever genocide or the war crimes against the innocent Palestinians. What do you say about that?
Well, Faisal, it has to do with both the US domestic policies as well as the geopolitical context of the Middle East. You see, the ceasefire could not be achieved from the US perspective or from the Israeli perspective until or unless the Israel would manage to achieve its objective that were declared objective before the war. Right now, Israel has not achieved any of these objectives. Israel could not
or don't want to achieve those objectives.
No, Israel has been trying, but the resistance is so fierce that
might be not for the smaller objectives, but have the bigger objectives.
Yes, definitely. Israel wanted to completely dismantle Hamas and Hezbollah. It failed. Israel wanted to completely demilitarize and no man's area in the southern Lebanon and the Gaza. It has failed. We have there are reports that many of the Hamas fighters are still at North Gaza in the Jabalia refugee camp, along with the civilians as well who refuse to go to the south. From the domestic point of view of US policy, from the US perspective, is that since right now there is a transitional period going on inside the US, so there are internal competition as well between different institutions. Some are in the favor of Biden, some are in the favor of Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, and none of them is basically trying to seize the ceasefire so that the other would not get beneficiary. So there is internal competition and internal struggle going on as well. So I think in the and the last thing that that should be mentioned is that both Hezbollah and Hamas, they are not going to accept any ceasefire from the point of weakness, because they thought that they have shown enough resistance and Israel is not in the strengthened position. In fact, Israel has been receiving many casualties, so Israel could not dictate the terms of ceasefire, and the only condition that they have put to accept the ceasefire is the complete withdrawal of Israel from southern Lebanon as well as the Gaza territory. So I think all of these elements and factions combined, I think the ceasefire is very less likely to happen in the near future.
And definitely we have to be mindful that retreat from the occupied West Bank as well, because lots of settlers who are there, and also the occupied Jerusalem and all those occupied territories, the Golan Heights and all that.
Definitely.
So you are absolutely right on that. Hamza, on November 21st, 2024, International Criminal Court, ICC, issued international arrest warrants of the de facto Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the former Defense Minister Joan Glant. Would 124 of the states who are the signatories of the Rome Statute would ever comply with the orders, as the European countries are divided to act on that in principle, while the United States actually termed it outrageous?
Outrageous, yes. Well, according to Rome Statute, the ICC members are obliged to arrest any individual who is subject to arrest warrants by ICC. If they enter their territory. However, we know that compliance becomes complicated by political considerations, especially when you have countries which have close relations with Israel and countries which are under the influence of United States of America. As you have already said, that United States has declared it outrageous and they have actually condemned it. Hungary, on the other hand, has declared that they are not going to arrest Netanyahu.
And we don't have to forget what happened with Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the ICC earlier.
Yes.
60, at least 12 senators earlier written a letter in which they have not only condemned but also threatened Karim Khan and the ICC of halting the fundings, as well as lots of life threats as well.
Exactly. And similarly is the case with France. They have categorically said that Netanyahu has immunity in France because Israel is not a member of ICC. So currently, if you see the situation illustrates a broader trend of diminishing respect of international law and ICC's
But issuing
authority.
arrest warrants of the criminals by the International Court of Criminal Court doesn't need any state to be a member or the party to this Rome
Exactly.
Statute,
Yes.
because court can issue the arrest warrants of anyone across the world.
Actually, there is another argument by the France that it was part of the deal which was done with Lebanon, with Hezbollah, that Netanyahu would not be arrested if ceasefire is going to happen.
It's
Yeah.
another case.
Yes,
a
it's
new
another
thing you were
scenario.
mentioning. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So for us, how do you see the statement of the senior advisor to Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Larijani, in which he claimed that Iran is preparing a response to Israel's October 26, 2024 retaliation? What do you think of such possible future escalation in Iran-Israel conflict, which according to Tehran aims to restore the deterrence? So do you think that Iran is preparing and Iran will retaliate?
Well, it is very hard to tell that whether Iran would retaliate or not, but there are multiple considerations. The first one is that if ceasefire has been achieved in favor of Hezbollah and Hamas and the Israeli occupational forces would withdraw, Iran might postpone its plan of retaliation. But if there is consistent pressure and there are consistent cyber attacks inside Iran, so there is a high possibility that Iran might retaliate. And right now, considering the Syrian spectrum as well, I think it is more than ever for Iran to restore its deterrence into the larger Middle Eastern region, because it was because of the Raza war that Iranian attention was diverted. So is the case with Russia in the case of Ukraine. So Syria was left exposed, and that was the chance that the rebels basically captured and led their offensive. So I think in order to refocus their attention on the larger Middle Eastern region, considering all of its non-state as well as state allies, Hezbollah, Hamas and Syria, I think there is a high probability that Iran might retaliate. However, there is some sort of difference within the Iranian state structure. The moderate faction or the reformist faction, they are not in favor of retaliation. They are seeking alternative concessions from the US in the wake of sanctions and other, while the conservative faction, they are more in a favor of retaliation, because there is a great deal and great history of mistrust between the conservative as well as the US when it comes to the
So do you think that
things.
because it is more than one and a half month when Israel attacked Iran, it was in fact in response to the barrage missile attack on Israel. So do you think that it would be before the Donald Trump's taking oath on January 20th, or it would be some sort of delay in response?
Well, these are all speculations, because previously it was speculated that Iran might retaliate against Israel on the day of US presidential elections, but it didn't happen. Now there is another speculation that maybe on the oath day of US President-elect Donald Trump, there might be some retaliation. We cannot say it for sure, because there are not, retaliation is not the solution, because but it is the larger, it is the part of a larger spectrum of strategic thinking, definitely.
Obviously. And every state wants to achieve some strategic objectives.
Retaliation is basically for
So, Hamza,
Yes.
Fraz is mentioning about the Syrian situation. You were mentioning also how this Syrian situation is actually changing and getting worse, because Bashar also requested Iran to help Syria in that sense. And right now the Russian jets are also pounding most of the rebels' strongholds. So how do you see, because US backing is also with the rebels and rest of the allies. So Israel seems to be the backing of most of the factions. So how do you see that situation? Because ultimately the beneficiary would be Israel.
Well, Fraz was mentioning about whether there would be a retaliation from Iran or not. I see it in a larger perspective as well, that Israel has actually created that situation by looking at the opportunity and exploiting the fault line, that they are behind, and its allies are behind the offensive, recent offensive in Syria. They want to occupy Hezbollah as well as Iran into Syria, just like previously they were. And they again want to create a sectarian type of warfare between Shia and Sunnis in order to again, get the Arab world into this conflict as well. This is in some way going to delay the response from Iran as well, and this is going to help Israel, secure its borders and maybe look for expansion as well.
Means Israel wants to play with the Arab nations as well, along with Iran, and intends to drag all of them into the war.
Well, back in 1948, 47, Qaid-e-Azam already said that Israel, the existence of Israel is basically a dagger in the heart of Arab Muslim world. So Israel had already been playing with the Arab nation. It is only that they have to realize it.
Definitely, you're right on that front. Dr. Saira, when Israeli military blames Syrian regime or Syrian government, supports Hezbollah and transfer weapons to them, while de facto Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we are constantly watching the events in Syria, determined to defend the vital interests of Israel and to maintain the achievements of war. So what it means actually, whether Israel backed by the West, especially the US, is behind the recent crisis in Syria in a bid to advance Israeli expansionist designs while the Iran supports the Syrian government.
These statements depict the broader geopolitical and strategic calculations of Israel. As you have mentioned, that Syria, according to Israel, serves as a key transit hub for Iranian arms and logistics support to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So Israel sees this access as a direct threat given Hezbollah's substantial rocket arsenal and the history of conflict with Israel. So any activity that strengthens the Hezbollah is viewed as undermining the Israel's national security. Israel is also determined to prevent the consolidation of Iran and Hezbollah forces along with its northern borders, particularly Golan Heights. There have been regular airstrikes in Syria attributed to Israel. The aim of them was to disrupt the weapon transfers and deter Iranian entrenchment. When Netanyahu talks about the vital interest, he is referring to preventing the adversaries from gaining the capabilities that could threaten the Israeli territorial or national security. And this would include striking weapon shipments and targeting Iranian-linked militia in Syria. While the next part of your question is about the Western support. So Israel's military operations in Syria are definitely aligned with the United States and the Western interest, particularly in countering Iranian influence in the region. Any faction or any factor that is strengthening Iran and its proxies would, of course, worry some aspect for the West, particularly United States of America and Israel. So the West tolerate or tacitly supports Israeli strikes. Why? Because they wanted to weaken Iran's regional ambitions. While on the other hand, of course, as part of the expansionist designs of the Israel also, and the immediate focus in Syria, although for me it appears to be defensive, but its policies are also seen by somewhat, indirectly to the broader territorial ambitions.
Definitely, you are absolutely right, Dr. Saira. Thank you very much for your presence online and for your very brief views. Thank you very much, Fraz, for your presence here in the studios. Thank you very much, Hamza, as well. Viewers, you have just listened to our panelists. Situation in Middle East is dire, it is volatile, really. When we are talking about the Hamas or Israel ceasefire, particularly when it comes to Gaza situation, unfortunately, beside lots of claims by the United States, but unfortunately, because of the Qatar's withdrawal from the mediation process, there are the grim chances to have peace in Gaza, particularly when Israel continues its strikes and its ground invasion on the innocent Palestinians. And there is lots of threats to the Palestinians there, to their lives as well because of the acute famine and hunger. Also, United Nations Refugee Agency must have to restart their aid process in Gaza because that is suspended right now, unfortunately, because the people need their support. Then, of course, when we are talking about world is waiting for the Trumps to take oath, but in between, Biden's administration wants to have some sort of positive gesture as well towards the Palestinians. But right now, there is nothing positive there. US still blocking peace, at least in the United Nations Security Council, providing arms, missiles, weapons to the Israeli illegitimate state of Israel and its occupation forces. Syrian situation is getting worse, although Iran and Russia wants to resolve this issue, but unfortunately the Western powers, the United States, all backing the rebels. Situation is getting worse, and the beneficiary is ultimately Israel. Iran is also preparing for a possible response to Israel, but we can't say that when this retaliation would be, because if the Syrian situation getting more worse, the peace deal between Hezbollah and Israel is going to be declined, or there would be no peace in Gaza. Might be there would be a retaliation. This is today's Foresight. It's time to sign off. Allah.